Hello, welcome to the Fluffy Fibres podcast, the French podcast in English on sewing, knitting and spinning your handmade wardrobe from head to toe. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today on this little special episode. It's not really an episode really, it's just a little special video I wanted to film to answer a tag that's been around for quite a few months now actually, which is the Seamstress tag. It was created by Holly Dolly, and I've been wanting to do this tag for quite a while. I figured it would be a really nice way to answer quite a few questions I've been asked over the past few months, and also to just do, put a bit about my sewing identity, I guess, within one neat video for you. And also I think it's a lovely way to connect people within the sewing community, so I'll be tagging some friends at the end of the video as well. So first of all, I'm wearing my latest make, which is very simple. It is another Coco by Tilly and the Buttons, and this time I made it out of a purple organic cotton knit, and it's super comfortable and I love it. So I haven't even had time to Instagram this one yet. So yes, the first question is, who are you? And I am Isabelle, and I'm French. And I was born and I used to live at the very opposite side of France, in northern France, very near to the Belgian border actually, since my family still lives in Lille. And then I lived in Paris for 10 years in my 20s, and now I have been living in southern France, in Montpellier to be more precise, for the past 8 years. And apart from that, I am a very happy mother of 2 children, a 5.5-year-old daughter and a 15-month-old son. And so I do love to sew for both them and me. So the second question is, when and why did you start sewing? And that's a question that I've got quite a few times already. I answered this question at the very beginning of my podcast, so about 5 years ago actually. So I really started sewing in 2000, and especially sewing clothes, in 2004. I was in the US at that time, and I had been wanting to start sewing, to learn how to sew for quite a few years, but I had been extremely busy with my studies, and so 2004 was the first year when I finally had more time to learn. And when I was in the US, I didn't have a sewing machine and I couldn't get one because I was only there for a year, and so there was no point in getting a sewing machine there. It would be a huge hassle to ship it back to France, and so I sewed by hand. I sewed my first dresses by hand, and actually I think that's a lovely way of learning, because you take your time, you make sure you know how to do each step really well. I think it was a great way to learn for me actually. And then when I came home, when I came back to France, I first borrowed my mother-in-law's sewing machine, and I promptly purchased one of my own because I realised it really was going to be a passion that would stick. And the rest is history really. I've never stopped sewing since. However, I did sew a little bit before that, just a few tiny projects, and that is going to actually tie in nicely with the why did I start to sew. So I made, when I was, I think about 12, I must have been 12, I wanted to sew a pillow cover a cushion cover for my older sister. And so I went to the shop and I got some fabric. It was a seersucker kind of fabric with a sky blue background and a lovely print. And I got some lace as well because I wanted to have a nice lace ruffle around it. And then I went to my grandma's in the countryside in northern France, and she helped me assemble. She showed me, rather, I did it, but she showed me how to put it together, assemble it, do the ruffles, and I assembled it on her Singer sewing machine that she'd had for her 16th birthday, I think. So at the very beginning of the 20th century. So it was, you know, a pedal sewing machine, and yeah, so my grandmother is the reason why I started sewing, why I wanted to learn how to sew, because she was a professional seamstress. She was my mother's mum, my maternal grandma, and I really I loved her very, very much. She was definitely my main inspiration in life, and so she used to make beautiful clothes. She used to make all of my mother's clothes when she was young, and before she married, I guess. Even after she married, I think she still made her a lot of clothes. She made, of course, her wedding dress, and also when I was little, she made dresses for our dolls as well, which I thought was just magic. I just felt like this was truly a magical power to have, to be able to create clothes. And so it's always been a fascination of mine. And actually when I was little, I did sew up a little dress on my own, and I must have been about 10, and I just again went to the fabric shop. It was a Toto was already around, and there's still one in Lille, and I got scraps of fabric, and I made a little dress for my favourite doll with a floral fabric and a sash and a collar with French lace eyelet. And actually I found it at my parents' about 2 years ago, and I was quite impressed with how it was made. And I did this entirely on my own. It was just my thing that I'd been wanting to do. Of course I made it by hand, and yeah, it was pretty functional. But yeah, the reason why I started sewing was my grandma, and sadly, when I started to sew, she was already in her 90s and she couldn't see very well anymore. But she was extremely enthusiastic with my learning to sew, and very encouraging. And I visited her very often as I could, because I really did love her very, very much. And whenever I came to visit, I made sure I'd packed all of the sewing I'd been doing so I could show her. And so I did a little show and tell. It was our ritual really when we met. I did a little show and tell, and she would feel the fabrics and feel the seams as well, since she couldn't see that well. And she was always so encouraging, and yeah, she's still very much with me whenever I sew. Yeah, that's a very, very important part of my sewing really, and it's, you know, I want to keep her alive as well, her memories alive through my sewing. And that's the reason why I never take shortcuts, because whenever I feel tempted to take a shortcut, I can feel my, you know, I just tell myself, you know, what if grandma is watching over my shoulder. However, that being said, my mum, we talked about that with my mum last summer, and I was looking at clothes that her mum had altered for her, and of course I turned it inside out, and I was quite surprised with the unevenness actually in the hem, in the way it was sewn up. And actually my mum told me that when my grandma was in a rush, she definitely would rush things. However, obviously with all of her professional jobs, she would make a stellar job. I mean, her work would be impeccable, but so my grandparents owned a very small farm in northern France, so it was a very hard life actually. And so on top of that, my grandma sewed to earn some extra money, and she had 3 children, so she had very, very little time. So I can well understand why she would sometimes have to rush to get some clothes for her own family. But still, when it comes to my sewing, I want to make her proud really, so I always try and go the extra mile really. So the third question is, what is your favourite or proudest make? And that is this, of course. That is why I put it on the dress form. This is my wedding dress that I made 10 years ago. Seb and I got married in 2007, and I of course had to make my wedding dress, and this was such a huge work, and such a work of love. And my major source for this was Susan Colgey's Bridal Couture book, which is extremely detailed when it comes to couture sewing techniques. She also has a book called Couture Sewing Techniques that I also have. Yes. And so I read both of these. I read some other things as well on bridal sewing, formal sewing, and I learned so very much when making this dress. So it's lined, interline, it's got waist stays, it's got boning, it's made out of Dupioni silk, and yes, it's blue because Seb's and my favourite colour is blue. And I hand sewed this little braid as well to the bodice to make more of an accent, and I was very, very proud of this dress. It's floor length, and funnily enough I actually made 2 dresses because when I was done with this one I feared it might be a little too glamorous actually for church, so I ended up making another dress, more subdued if you want, with a skirt and a separate corset, really, corset bodice with wide straps. And so I ended up having 2 wedding dresses for my wedding, and so I wore this one for the party afterwards at my parents', which was just wonderful. What is your most disastrous make? My most disastrous make, well, there has been quite a few over the years, so I'm sure I'm, forgetting some for sure. I do remember one of the first skirts I made. I used some organza for the lining, which was not a good idea because it was not breathable at all, so I ended up never wearing this. One of my most recent ones has to be the Arum dress by Deer & Doe. It's a very simple dress with dolman sleeves, so the sleeves are contiguous with the body of the dress. And this is designed for woven fabrics. And I made mine out of a lightweight linen, and it just looked like a potato sack on me. I think I don't have the figure for this at all. It just looked way too bulky on me, and I think I never ever shared it on the podcast or on Instagram. I made it, I think 2 years ago? Yes, that was it, yeah, before I was expecting my son. And it was such a huge disappointment. I think if I were to make it out of a knit, it might work, but obviously I think I've just given up on this pattern working for me, really. But yeah, that was one of my most disastrous makes, definitely. The Arum dress by Deer & Doe. Question 5. Where is your favourite place to go fabric shopping? So, at the moment in Montpellier, I can't really say I have a favourite place to go shopping. I do like going to Toto, the team is really lovely there, they know me, they're very friendly, but I can't get all of my fabrics over there. They're getting better, they're definitely improving the choice, the selection, the quality, but still I do go there for my printed cottons. They have lovely cottons, or solid cottons as well, but for anything dressier, really, I just can't go there, so I shop online quite a bit. However, in terms of actual, brick and mortar places, I would say my favourite place has to be the Sacré-Cœur, of course, in Paris. The Tissu Saint-Pierre, the Marché Saint-Pierre, which is also called Dreyfus, or Tissu Rennes. I would say actually Tissu Rennes even more, because their fabric is just immensely good quality. I've never ever been disappointed in anything I bought from Tissu Rennes, and I used to go there quite a bit when I lived in Paris, of course, when I was in my 20s, so yeah, definitely Tissu Rennes in Paris. What is your most used pattern? So that's a tough one, actually. I would say actually at the moment one of my most used patterns is the cocoa dress, because this went together in an hour. It's super simple to make, it's super nice to wear, it's both comfortable and I just feel really pretty with it. So it's just everything, it ticks all the right boxes for me. Funnily enough, I thought about this question, and I think my most made pattern is actually a nursing pattern, simply because there are so few sewing patterns for nursing that are nursing friendly, that look really nice. Now Sew Over It just came out with a couple of lovely sewing patterns for nursing tops. Sadly, I don't need them anymore. My son has decided to stop nursing, but I still wear actually my nursing tops because I just feel they're really lovely, and they are the Amber / Perfect Nursing Top by Megan Nielsen. And I made, so it's either top of a dress, and I think I made 6 of them, 5 or 6. And yeah, over the years I made a few with my daughter, and then I made a few with my son when I was expecting my son. And so yeah, funnily enough, and the reason for this is I actually don't tend to repeat patterns that much, with a few notable exceptions. But this, because there were so few sewing patterns that I liked for nursing tops, then I ended up making several versions of this one. But yeah, most of the time I don't really repeat patterns that much. One that could also be, when on its way to become a most used pattern, would be the I'll Dye Your Dress by Pauline Alice, and that is actually because you have so many versions in it. You can make such different looking dresses, and that's the reason also why I love making Coco, is that you can, because you have you can use such different fabrics and have a very different result every time. So 7, your most dreaded sewing task is unpicking, definitely. Unpicking seams, especially on knit fabrics, especially if I've used a narrow elastic, a narrow zigzag. That's just the worst ever to unpick. That and serged seam as well. But yeah, that's just such a pain. A task that I don't really enjoy doing, but I wouldn't say it's a dreaded task, but it would be all the preparation, really, cutting out the fabric. To me, these feel more like chores, and I'm very excited to get to the actual sewing, but I wouldn't say it's a dreaded task, no. But yeah, having to unpick a seam, yeah, that would be a dreaded task. Question 8, and your favourite sewing task is, I love making dots and pleats. I don't know why. I think it's usually these tasks come at the beginning of a project, and so it's all the promise of constructing the whole garment, I think. I just love these. They're very zen. They're a very precise task to do. I really like it. I think it's a very clean task to be making. You can really have a very clean finish on these. Weirdly enough as well, something I really like to do is actually inserting zippers. I know it's not always the case, but I really do like inserting zippers. I think it's really gratifying. It really is what makes the garment come together, really makes it wearable. 9, what is your favourite sewing entertainment? Well, that will have to be audio podcasts. I tend to watch video podcasts when I'm knitting, but I tend to listen to audio podcasts when I'm sewing. So yeah, audio podcasts. That is the one time when I do manage to catch up with my favourite audio podcasts. Question 10, printed or PDF? I used to be very much in the printed pattern camp, and really very much loathe assembling PDFs. Actually now I'm the other way around. I've come to the other side, and I really now like PDF patterns. First of all, because they've really changed things for me as someone living in France. Getting independent patterns from abroad was so expensive with the shipping. It was just crazy. It usually cost about the same amount as the actual pattern. So that's made a huge difference in my sewing life, really, in my choices of patterns. also, of course, it comes, you know, you get it straight away, you don't have to wait. But also, from a sewing point of view, I've come to really like the fact that I can, you know, print my pattern over and over again. I don't have to worry about losing a piece or ruining a piece. I don't, you know, you can't, I don't have to trace anything anymore. I just can print it out, and if I need to make another side, then I will just print it out again. Of course, that's super helpful with kids' PDF patterns, because it means you can print out the size you want, and then, you know, I'll be printing out the next size for the next, you know, whenever I need it. And also, I've really just come to enjoy the process. I've just come to integrate the process, the task of assembling PDFs within my sewing routine, really. So it no longer feels like an extraterraneous chore. It really is part of the process. And now that I've done that, that I've really embraced it as part of my sewing, I actually quite enjoy it. I think it's one of the very relaxing steps in sewing. I watch a video podcast when I do so. I know it's going to take some time, so I just, you know, I'm just much more philosophical about it, really. I also like the way in which it makes you really familiar with, it gets you to be familiar with the pattern, really. You really have to pay very much attention to all the pattern pieces, and I don't know, I've really come to enjoy it, really. 11. What sewing machine do you use? I use Janome that I got a couple of years ago. I used to have a Brothers sewing machine, and now I have the Janome Skyline 5, which I got as a treat, a huge treat. It is not a cheap sewing machine, but it was a year when I had done so much overtime, and I just decided to treat myself to this machine, and I really, really do love it. I wanted a machine that would deal equally well with quilting and dressmaking. Obviously, I do a lot more of dressmaking, but sometimes I do like to quilt as well. So it's a wonderful machine. I can only say good things about it. Lastly, 12. Do you have any other hobbies? Well, if you know me, of course you know I do. I knit a lot. I just love knitting, even though it's only starting knitting. I started knitting way later than sewing. I started knitting in 2011. I really do very much love knitting now. I also crochet, spin, even though I haven't done any spinning in way too long, but I still do enjoy it very much. Because really, to me, as of course you know, because I've said it in the intro, but I really do have this goal of making my own wardrobe. So of course, you know, having both knitting and sewing in my arsenal helped me towards this goal. I do, apart from fibre crafts, I do have a passion for classical music. I don't really talk about this very often, but I do have a passion for classical music. I did a lot of music in my youth, and I used to sing a lot, so classical music. And before I had my children, I actually was singing quite a lot at concerts, and I do miss it actually, but I haven't just found the time to fit it back into my schedule since having my children. Hopefully when they're older I can go back to it, because it really brought me a lot of joy. I still sing a lot, obviously, for my children, for myself. I'm always singing at home, but I would like to get back to it on a more serious level, really. So that is it for this tag. And I would like to tag two friends. I would like to tag my friend Maria of the Stitched in Sweden podcast, who does beautiful sewing and knitting. And congratulations, Maria, on your wonderful wedding, by the way. And I would also like to tag Kristin, who has the Yarngasm podcast and Wool and Vine yarn, of course. And she also does a lot of dressmaking now, and just love everything she makes. So yeah, if the two of you would like to answer this tag, I would be so happy that you did. And so I hope you enjoyed this different little episode. And I will hopefully be back with some content on what I've been knitting and sewing and so forth. And in the meantime, happy making. I hope your making brings you joy. Bye!